moderator, Professor ASEAN Idris, my fellow panelists, both gentlemen, have a lot of respect for both gentlemen, Topa and Wing, my mentor and friend. Also acknowledging the presence of Tan Sri Rebecca, who has just retired from APEC. Friends, fellow Malaysians, a very good morning to all of you. The title is a bit mouthful, but I broadly just want to touch on how I see where we are, both domestically and globally, and what sort of mindset shift that is required for us to think differently and do things differently. We are in once in a generation moment globally, or maybe even longer. There are people who say that this is for the first time since the end of the Second World War that we are in a situation where we do not necessarily have the same political economy, global order for us to rely upon. Trump is taking over on 20th of January, and we will have to sit back and prepare for fireworks. But what is certain is that the political economic order globally that guided the world since the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 has ended. There was a set of ideas that we are buying or generally operating within, including what is broadly branded as neoliberalism, the idea that free trade is good, the idea that market is dominant, the idea that privatization was ideal. I think those has ended. But what is to come is for us to shape and, of course, for us to have to deal with those challenges as well. In this complex situation, Malaysia has a once-in-a-generation opportunity. Why I say there's a once-in-a-generation opportunity, I outlined this in my book, Second Takeoff. I'm not here to advertise my book, but you're welcome to buy one. Of course, when I say there's a second takeoff, there was the first takeoff. First takeoff happened between 1988 and 1997. And what triggered the first takeoff? It was actually United States forcing Japan to appreciate yen in 1985 in the Plaza Accord. So when yen was forced to appreciate, by about 1987, 1988, it was already too expensive to export from Japan. Therefore, Japanese firms relocated to Malaysia, Batam, Singapore, Thailand predominantly, and through which they also brought with them their Taiwanese and Korean suppliers. And that triggered the first Malaysian economic takeoff. Of course, how it failed, everyone knows that there was the 1997 Asian financial crisis. And why we were stuck in the financial crisis was also because while we had many manufacturing activities, we did not have enough R&D, we did not create enough technology. At the same time, too many people were too busy and too happy with playing real estate. So there was a real estate boom, and eventually, when the crisis hit, the real estate sector was hit badly, and eventually fell. Then in 1998, Anwar Ibrahim was arrested or detained and then beaten up, and that sets off a series of political crises. And in 2001, I think most importantly, China joined the World Trade Organization. When China joined the World Trade Organization, China became the factory of the world, and Malaysia had very little use or very little relevance globally. So I think that is a cycle that has now ended. The cycle has now ended, and therefore, over the past few years, for example, this morning I was shown specific data about the E&E sector. FDI investment into the E&E sector since 2021 actually is the total amount is more than the FDI investment into the semiconductors or the E&E sector over the last 40 years, or the 40 years preceding 2021. So we are seeing a new cycle, and the new cycle, of course, comes with a lot of uncertainty, but the new cycle gives us an opportunity to rethink where we are, how we position ourselves as a nation. And this coincided um, in a with the emergence of the Madani or unity government, which is headed by Dr. Sri Anwar Ibrahim. The new government, at least if you want to refer to any major documents, I think there are three documents that are relevant here. The first one is the Madani Economic Framework, which was launched by the Prime Minister in July 2023, which broadly has two main ideas. Raising the ceiling, we need to do more in order to create a more sophisticated economy, and raising the floor. We need to distribute and we need to level the playing field for as many people as possible, and seeing this as interchangeable, intertwined, and doing it at once and not separately. I think that is the key idea. And in August 2023, Prime Minister launched the National Energy Transition Roadmap, which is also very core to the whole shift that we are talking about. And thirdly, in September 2023, Prime Minister launched the new Industrial Master Plan 2030. I think these are the key documents that outline the aspiration and directions of travels that the Prime Minister intends to see. And I think this creates a potentially all the stars align moment. So we're hoping that we'll reach there. But what do we want to do, and what sort of mindset do we have to shift? I think first of all, we must be bold and be very clear that we do not want a colonial economy mindset. What I mean by colonial economic mindset? During the colonial period, we import foreign labor and then produce rubber or palm oil. And when there's an economic slump, foreign workers were sent back. And when growth comes, we import more labor. And it's a cycle without technology. So the rubber economy, if you read Sultan Nasrin Shah's new book, he accounted for the rubber economy. The rubber economy was basically an economy that with very little technology, although later on there was some technology involved, but generally it was a colonial economy run by the agencies, including Samdabi and all this, which was owned by the British interests. But that was mainly a colonial economy. But today, many segments of our economy is still running on that basis. We employ foreign workers. We do not use technology. We pay lousy pay, and then it's a vicious cycle. I think that has to end. We have to end that. We have to end an economy that depends on unskilled foreign labor, and move up to whether foreign or local. At least we must build an economy that is technologically based and that is based on skill, and not just relying on labor input. I think that is something that we will have to be very clear. And we cannot just also depend on foreign capital without realizing that actually we have liquidity in our market, in our capital market. We must be able to now steer, and through policy, through engagement, through creating the right platform to steer Malaysian capital into technology. Now, I refer back to 1990s, and I say that people were too interested in real estates, chasing after real estates, and that was one of the reasons why we got trapped in the 1997 crisis. Today, I think we have a lot of opportunity. I've been talking to industrial park operators. I've been talking to people who have money. I say this is the time that to see whether this second takeoff really happened is really to see that the real estate players now, of course, many of them have now shifted to industrial park. But it is not just about building industrial park and selling industrial park as if they are condos. It is really about creating values and creating a resilient supply chain. If we can create a resilient supply chain, Malaysia will be very relevant globally. The time of seeing industrial development or global supply chain as goods moving around freely, I think that has ended. Efficiency is no longer the game. There was for the longest of time, global corporations chasing for cheapest location to produce. Today, you talk to global corporations, they are looking for the safest supply chain, the more resilient supply chain will win. And how to do so is really to create a strong and resilient supply chain. Secondly, the neoliberal ideas that have governed us has been the governing operating assumptions for the last 35 years is now essentially bankrupt. We will have to accept a few things. Number one, we shouldn't be satisfied with growing in a linear way. And I have advocated that Malaysia should at least see ourselves growing at 6% and try to push it. Of course, you do not want to see growth with very high inflation. So how do you create sustainable growth but growing more than 6%? I think it's a challenge. But again, we cannot continue to see that we depend only on private money without coordination. Mazzucato talks about mission economy. We should start thinking about how to create synergy between the state, the government, private sector, and also technology. How to create that sort of synergy so that we can allow for a lot more technology acquisition in our system. Now, one of the main areas that we have been working on is semiconductor industry. We want to see Malaysia not just doing OSAT, not just doing outsourced testing and assembly. We want to see Malaysia moving higher and becoming at least an indispensable middle in the supply chain. We may not be able to be providing and creating technology like the United States, China, Japan, Korea, Taiwan, but we want to occupy a space just below them, just below the countries that I've just mentioned. We see that Malaysia can occupy an indispensable middle in the supply chain, particularly in the semiconductor supply chain, and we should see ourselves creating a lot more IPs and having a lot more Malaysian-made technology in the years to come. So we need industrial policy. We cannot just go by neoliberal ideas that the market knows everything. And we also need a more useful state. A government that actually provide public services that is actually working for the people. So that comes to my third point, which I think we need fundamental rethinking on the following issues. Number one, on technology. As I mentioned earlier, we must put technology at the center of whatever we do. It is no longer just about investing for investment's sake. It's no longer just about making money for making money's sake. We want to create a nation centered around technology. The second point is that we want to create a nation where job is also at the center of discussion. Very often we do not talk about jobs because we think that job will take care of itself. But in the future, I think when we think about the Malaysian economy, it is very important to realize this. We can no longer or forever thinking of the United States as the final destination of our export. Therefore, we can no longer just think about suppressing wages in order to facilitate export. We have to start thinking about Malaysia as also a consumption base. ASEAN as also a consumption base. That means ASEAN is not just producing to sell to the US. ASEAN must have a middle class which is reasonably wealthy or wealthy enough to at least consume some parts of our products. That means we have to rewire our logic that we are not just exporting. we are also consumers. But to create consumers, you need to create jobs. You need to create jobs that pay decently so that your own people are able to consume some parts of your products. This is going to be a challenge, not just for Malaysia, not just for ASEAN, but even today, it is a challenge for China, because over the last 70 or 80 years, Japan grew rich by exporting to the US in the 50s. The four dragons, the four tigers, then China. Everyone was exporting to the United States, but today the United States is facing a situation of a shrinking middle class. So export-oriented economy required rethinking, and we must put job at the center of our discussions of our economy. Thirdly, we need strong public services. Public services including rethinking about housing. Housing cannot just be about private profit. Rethinking about investing a lot more in public transport. Rethinking about investing a lot more in public healthcare. Now, how the details is debatable, but the point is that we need strong public services, because these public services, public transport, public housing, or some form of public element in the housing, whether it's public investment or public ownership, and public healthcare, all this will support a robust and resilient population and an economy. And we also need to rethink about our cities. Our cities required rethinking. And of course, I'm attracted by the last bit of this topic. The last bit of this topic talks about a world that is threatened by environmental crisis. If we want to think about how to deal with environmental crisis, we will need to bring, and in the context of Malaysia, we need to rethink our cities. We need to bring people back from a sprawling city into the inner city, so that not everyone needs to own a car, not everyone needs to drive a car. We need to rethink how to create a city which most people depend on public transport and not depending on private cars. We need to create a city or a nation that consume less petrol, less oil as a whole. Whether we electrify our transport or whichever, we need to rethink how we deal with this. And my final point is this: we need to rethink federalism. For the Malaysian economy to grow rapidly, to grow beyond a linear model, we will have to imagine that Sarawak is Perth. I'm using Australian as an analogy. Let's say, for example, Sarawak is the resource-based state, and it is an engine of growth. Penang is the technology state, and Penang Kulim will fly, and it is an important engine. We will have to imagine that Southern Johor will be like Melbourne or Osaka or Busan, which is the second economic capital. So federal bureaucrats and the federal government will have to rethink how it sees various regional capitals and regional economy, so that the Malaysian economy is not dependent on just the Klang Valley, but you have a second economic capital in Johor, you have a technology capital in Penang and Kulim, and you have a resource-based economy, strong resource-based economy in Sarawak. All this required our brains to be rewired and to have a new perspective to see how we should drive the economy forward. So the first 2 years of the Madani government has stabilized the economy, stabilized politics, and provided the base for transformative change. But for transformative change to happen, we need to rethink our perspective, and our perspective has to change because the world has changed. Thank you very much.